Hi, everybody. I'm MK Payne.
And I'm Sasha White, and this is Identity Crisis, advice for gender-critical young people.
Today, we are going to talk about some of the silencing happening around the gender debate, but there's someone who we want to introduce this topic for us.
So it was never stated better than when it was stated here.
Were you silent or were you silenced?
Boom. Oprah just ate that up.
We do it again.
One more time.
Were you silent or were you silenced? The latter.
The latter.
I was
The
silent.
latter.
The way she smiled right when she said it.
She knew.
She knew what she was doing.
Were you silent or were you silenced?
Silenced.
All right, I think we got it.
The latter.
So that was Oprah.
So, Sasha, I have a question for you.
Shoot.
Were you silent or were you silenced?
The latter. Imagine Meghan said, the former. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, it's funny when Meghan said it because it was like for her, she was saying the latter as in to put her responsibility for not having spoken on an external force, I guess, which is kind of what, like, one of the things we're going to talk about. Like, well, yeah, were you silent or were you silenced? Like, what is the difference between those two things? You know, what choice do we ultimately have? Do we ultimately have the choice in the end of whether we're silent?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing because I think there is a combination in the gender debate. We see a lot of genuine silencing tactics, that the goal of these tactics is to silence the debate, to silence specific individuals, to get them to shut up. And ultimately they do. But were they silenced? Well, like, at what point do you actually make a personal choice? And I think there's a difference between, like, you say something, you write something, you put it out there, and then it doesn't get, like, it's not shared, it's not picked up, it's not like put out there in any way, like it's taken off of YouTube, it's like taken out off of Medium, like you said the thing, like, and then it was silenced, versus I didn't actually say the thing ever because I was afraid. And there's a lot of, like, real genuine reasons to be afraid, and so that's not to belittle the fear, but were you silent or were you silenced?
Right, because like you said, the fear is real, but it still leads you to a choice. I mean, it's something we haven't actually really touched on this, like on whether we feel afraid, but maybe we'll talk about that at some point. But I mean, because I definitely feel fear to speak on some of this stuff and to do some of the stuff we do. Yeah, that connects us to Rob Hoogland, who we wanted to talk about today. So you've probably heard about Rob, but he is in prison right now in Canada.
Because the story has been silenced.
The latter. So the reason that, Rob fits into this so perfectly is because they did their utmost to silence him, in this case, they being the Canadian government, and yet he chose to speak anyway. So, can
you summarize this story for someone who maybe hasn't heard it?
Yes. So Rob Hoogland is a dad in Canada of a daughter who identifies as trans and is currently transitioning to be a trans boy.
She's like a teenager, right?
She is a teen. Minor. Yeah, she's a minor. And he was arrested in late March, so about a week ago, for contempt of court due to his continued violation of an order restricting his speech regarding his child. So he's been fighting this for a long time, I think several years, about whether he has a right to oppose her getting hormone treatment. And she has received hormone treatment. He said in an interview that she has a beard now. And he's in jail. So he's going to be in jail until, I think, his trial in April, and he was denied bail. And this happened because he continuously refused to obey the gag order, that he wasn't allowed to talk about this with the media, and he wasn't allowed to call his daughter and call her she. And the judge actually told him, the only thing you're allowed is to think that in your own brain. You're not allowed to say it out loud, even at home. And he did it anyway. And now he's in jail or in prison.
So we have in this case a genuine silencing attempt on the behalf of one of the largest governments in the world, that on threat of imprisonment, you are to be silent. And he didn't. Anyways, he spoke up. So he was silenced and yet not silent.
Right. So that's why this case is so powerful in terms of Oprah's question, because you would think, like, we were talking about this before, and you were saying most people don't have a gun to their heads, like they have to be silenced. But in this case, he very nearly did have a gun to his head. I mean, he had the threat of prison. And like you said, he did it anyway. He wasn't silent. And I think that's really interesting. What is it in a person that makes them do that?
Even with a gun to your head, I have to say you do still have a choice. It's not a good choice. It's a really shitty choice, but we can't pretend that you don't have a choice to make.
But at what point does instinct kick in? I mean, if you offer a person, a starving person, a piece of bread, do they have a choice to say no? I don't know about that. Like what do you think?
I think that probably you do. I think there might be a certain point where your like cognitive functioning isn't happening anymore and there isn't a choice. But we have seen people who stood up for what they believed at gunpoint and were killed. Throughout history, there are people who, in their dying breath were still standing up for what they believed. And so I think probably in any one individual circumstance, if that person was actually killed, we probably can't know what the state of their mind was. But I do think that there are choices that are made even in really hard situations. And that doesn't mean that you're wrong to make the choice to be silent to save yourself. Like, I don't think that's ethically, morally wrong necessarily. So I don't want to say that it's like a criticism on the person, but I think that acknowledging that there are choices, and sometimes we make hard choices in order to keep surviving and to keep protecting our families, to keep the ones we love safe. I do think sometimes we make choices that prioritize those things over our own speech.
I kind of disagree on the instinct choice thing. I'm not so sure that I completely agree, but in terms of but I guess what I'm disagreeing with is what does choice really mean in that context? The fact that we are forced to make choices is very true. And most of us don't have these most extreme right. situations. So that's more of like a, arguing how many angels can fit on the head of a pin type of thing. Like, is it a choice? Is it not a choice? But in other cases, it's like you have a choice of, are you going to suffer very serious consequences or are you going to be quiet? Right. So that's very much a choice.
Yeah. And I think that's mostly what we're dealing with here is, are you going to suffer social, economic consequences, or are you going to be quiet? And I think that the extreme trans activists in this debate have really done a good job of silencing on at least like a larger level the debate. And I think that this is incredibly intentional because they know that if the debate happens, they're going to lose it. And there's even been like documents put out from different trans organizations that show this.
Yeah, so you were just showing me one such document before we started filming, and this was crazy. I mean, seriously, MK, you should tell us a little bit, because what I'm seeing is they're basically advising, like, don't talk about certain things in the media or try to keep things hush hush, like as a strategy, right?
Yeah, so there was this document put out in 2019 that's called Only Adults, Good Practices in Legal Gender Recognition for Youth. And it's this report put together by various different networks, including the Thomas Reuters Foundation and various other kind of like international NGO types. And the report is centered around what are some good practices for different organizations to take when advocating for trans rights for youth specifically. And a lot of this report is talking about the impact that media and public debate has on trans rights for youth specifically. And the overarching theme in this report is that you want to get your legislation out into the government ahead of any media attention, that you essentially want to avoid attention in the media and limit public debate, because when debate happens, then opposition has arisen as a result. And they frame this as a bad thing. So, for example, one of the things says, in certain countries like the UK, information on legal gender recognition reforms has been misinterpreted in the mainstream media, and opposition has arisen as a result. They say they recommend that organizations get ahead of the media story. And they say there's a real risk that where advocates fail to intervene early, seizing or sensitizing the media and the public to trans rights in general, the legal gender recognition in particular, persists negative and pernicious narratives about trans rights agenda may take hold in the public imagination, which will negatively influence the legislative process and prospects for success. And they recommend that NGOs basically avoid excessive coverage in the media. That's a direct quote from them, that NGOs have observed that excessive coverage in the media means much of the debate has been confused and does not actually discuss the point at issue, being legal gender recognition, but rather intertwines it with discussion regarding medical surgeries. This is something that NGOs in the UK have had to try to counteract because of the media attention that they're receiving in that country. So all of this is, and we'll put a link to this in the description. I really recommend reading the whole report because it's actually a really good handbook for gender critical advocates on what you should be doing. It's essentially just the opposite of everything that they're doing, like get attention on the issue, because I think the trans activists have really found a way to weaponize these silencing tactics to get things happening under the radar, to make people so afraid to speak out that there is no public debate, because they know that if there's a public debate, they're going to lose it. Mm-hmm. And so they have to just work with these silencing tactics. They've really found a way to make silence benefit them. Yeah, when it's someone else's silence, but even their own, because they don't recommend going to the media and doing interviews about why you support this bill that you're lobbying your representative to. They don't want you to do that. They want you to be quiet, even as a trans activist in the media. And I think that's really interesting.
That is fascinating. It makes me think of us. We have broken out of the silence and the silencing, right? And we're speaking loud and clear. My question is there anything that we would not want to be heard in saying that we say? Are there any points that we would not think it would be helpful to make? But okay, I want to pose that question, but I also wanted to say what I remember, like I thought of what I should have said before, so maybe I'll splice it in my disagreement, minor point of disagreement with the choice thing. What I was thinking is kind of like, I'm not so sure what if it's a choice or if it's instinct that you really don't have a choice. If you, again, in my extreme example, if like you have a gun to your head, or if you're a starving woman in a concentration camp and then the commandant says like, sleep with me and I'll give you some bread. I don't know if you have a choice, if your body gives you a choice, or if you have to do it. So that would be my, I think that would be a real lack of choice is what I was thinking. Yeah, I want to go ahead. You can respond to that. Yeah, I'll let you.
So I find this interesting. So I don't entirely disagree. I don't know, but I think that it's interesting because I think it really reveals the flaws in choice feminism, where it's like, well, she chose to enter the sex trade. She chose to post these sexy pictures of her online. She chose to wear that outfit, whatever. Like all of these ideas of like she chose and therefore it's empowering. The idea that, well, it's a choice you made. And I think that something that we probably agree on is that sometimes even if there is a technical aspect of a decision happening in your brain, the choice is so barely even a choice because of what your environment is, your situation, the various pressures put on you, that it doesn't feel like a choice in any meaningful way. You're just doing what is expected of you to survive in a moment, or doing what you've been trained, conditioned, brainwashed even to do.
Right. I do agree in terms when we talk about things like the porn industry, where, well, you said prostitution, I thought of porn, because a lot of justification is like, if you're faced with this like horrific act that's being done, that's undoubtedly painful and degrading and probably causing serious harm to her body, then the response is like, okay, well, she chose to do it. That is really tricky. It's like, we know that they're on drugs a lot of the times. We know that they get manipulated in the sense of like, okay, you're here, guess what? We're going to do this crazy, we want you to do this act that wasn't in your contract before. So either agree to do it or go home and you won't get paid. And and like I said, drugs, we know a lot of drug usage too going on. So that's much more of a choice than the starving thing. I think that still is a choice. You do still have, like you said, you still have a choice. We should give ourselves a lot of responsibility that you can get up and walk out. And that's something that is like, you've been arrested, you know that what it is to really not have a choice. When you're in a cell, you don't have a choice. And that's when you can't walk away. Pretty much any other time in your life, like, you can technically walk away. You just feel like you don't have a choice because you're going to have extreme adverse consequences, like you're going to lose a job or something like that. But yeah, I don't know where I was ending with that. But this is an interesting concept, this choice. What do choices mean? And certainly we have all these pressures and things that are compelling us in our choices all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes me think that the idea of framing something as a choice is not really useful, that instead we should examine what are the pressures on someone to do one thing or another, and are they doing that thing because of pressure or because they genuinely want to do the thing? And I think that that's a lot of the times the question around what is a meaningful choice. Like when I go shopping and I'm choosing which shampoo I want, like I have a meaningful choice. There's no pressure. But if someone stands to me, gun to my head, and says, "You will buy Suave,"
oh no, like, not Suave.
Right. They're not good, so I wouldn't buy them anyways. But it becomes less of a meaningful choice. Although technically, I do think I could choose to just stand there and get shot in the head. Like, but it's not really a meaningful choice. And so can you even call it a choice? Like, I think it just shows the futility, I think, of trying to say, well, she chose that, he chose that, like it's a choice. I think it's kind of, which I guess brings us, back around to, are you silent or silenced? And it's the same, like they're really two sides of the same coin, because you are silent because you feel you're being silenced. I'm silenced because of all of these pressures, because of my peer group, my job, my family. Like, I'm silent because of all of these pressures that are silencing me. You could stand up and say something and risk it all. But you're making a strategic decision not to. And so are you silent or silenced in that case?
Yeah, I think honestly, that's why, like, God, Oprah asked a great fucking question. Like, she really did. I mean, everyone is joking, like she stayed up all night rehearsing that one. Like she really liked that one. She did. But it is actually such a fruitful question now that we really start to talk about it. And yeah, you're absolutely right. There's all these pressures and outside forces on us in the choices we make. But we do have a choice. Our choice does go pretty far. We might disagree on, like, will your body let you make that choice at the moment of mortal threat? But we agree that the choice goes pretty far. And that's interesting, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting because we also do see people choose silence in a way that has been strategic in advancing their cause. I think, for example, about a prominent animal rights activist who took a vow of silence for a year because of his conviction for animal rights. And he got actually kind of famous for it. And now he raises a lot of attention for animal rights and veganism because of this vow of silence he took for a year. And, it's not like he invented that tactic in 2018 or whatever. Activists have been using silence strategically to raise awareness. I've seen protests against male violence happening where women tape over their mouths in an X to indicate the silence that they feel is happening. And these images are really striking and powerful and can get a lot of attention. when I was doing protests at slaughterhouses, we did a silent vigil where we all wore black, we had candles, and we taped over our mouths in silence. And it was actually a lot more, I think, powerful to passersby than some of the ones where we're out there chanting with our picket signs and, making a lot of noise, because it's unsettling to people. And I think the idea of silence being unsettling and finding a way to use it strategically is really interesting, because when we think, are you silent or silence? Like, it's this idea that to be silent is for something wrong to be happening to you. And yet when people do make a choice, an intentional strategic decision to be silent, it can actually be incredibly powerful in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the silence gives you power thing is what I was about to say too. We actually talked about this in our video about one tactic to debate trans activists, because we talked about how asking questions and then sitting back and letting them answer them is so much more effective for so many reasons. It makes your mind able to think more clearly and less emotionally. And, you give them enough rope, they hang themselves with it. Of course, you give MK enough rope, she'll hang you with it. Like, she's too good with words. But, typically with someone like this, it stands true. But actually, I think in the end, you were kind of stumped with giving the trans activist arguments. So when you had to be more, rather than just answering my constant attempts at making points. So that is something that can gain you power. And we see that with the good practices thing that you were just reading or just talking about, in terms of the trans activists want to use silence to their advantage. Is there anything in our movement that we wouldn't want to get out there? Are there any facts that don't help us or that we think might sway people against us?
Well, I don't know about facts, but I do think sometimes just running your mouth is not strategic. We're all human. We're petty and foolish sometimes, and sometimes we have bad ideas. And I have learned over time to really try to not put into writing or put out in public anything that I wouldn't want to be put on a court record. And so, I do feel fairly confident, but, sometimes I should talk with my friends over text. Like, sometimes in that group chat, we might get a little bit carried away about take a joke a little too far.
Sure.
And those things, no, I don't think would be strategic. And I really try not to put anything, like I said, actually out of my mouth or in writing that I ultimately don't stand by. I do try to be strategic, even in private conversation. But, sometimes we have to catch ourselves like, okay, I'm really just being a petty person right now. I'm just ranting. I'm just venting. And no, I wouldn't say that publicly. And I think that, on social media, there's sometimes people who will post literally their every thought as if as they're thinking it on social media, as if it's just a stream of conscious way of almost processing their thought. Like, just because they've said it, tweeted it, doesn't mean that they even agree with it. They're literally just processing their thoughts out loud for the entire internet to see. And I don't think that's particularly strategic. I don't think there's anything ethically or morally wrong with it, but I tend to prefer being a little bit more reserved and only using my voice when I really want people to hear it. I think that means when I say something, it resonates a little bit more than if I was just constantly blabbing about what I had for lunch and my thoughts on my, cat's dinner or whatever.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it definitely, in terms of the strategy, you want to keep silent at times. You want to strike when you're ready to strike. But I don't know that there's any part of our narrative or our sort of thesis here that we wouldn't want to be aired. You know what I mean? Like, we want it to be aired. We want all of it to see the light. We want the whole, everything that's been done to us, everything we've said, we want it to be aired. Like, look, this is what they've accused me of saying that they've said is so hateful. Decide for yourself if you really agree with that. But I don't want it kept under wraps, because then perhaps people will imagine something much worse.
Yeah, it reminds me, I just saw this random anon on Twitter saying, wait, I just learned that gender abolition is a TERF phrase. I feel so cheated now.
Oh
and
God.
It's hilarious. Radical feminists want to abolish gender. And that actually sounds like something that these people, it's one of my former friends who is now transitioning has art that she drew, and it like is up on her Instagram that says gender is over, and it's like this, you know, radical piece of like graffiti style art, and it says gender is over. Her whole fucking thing right now is that she's transitioning, she's on testosterone, and like stop being friends with me because I don't believe in her they them pronouns, and like I thought gender was over. Is it over, or is it your whole fucking thing? Like, anyways, all this is to say, like, our arguments, we do want them out there, because when people hear them, even the extreme trans activists who call people Turks actually agree with us, and then they don't know what to do with that because our arguments are reasonable.
Right. And they say no debate, and they say don't read turf points, don't respond. And I happened to be looking on YouTube at different like TRA videos, and a theme was we're not going to merit their points. Their points don't merit response. So we're not going to really talk about their arguments. We're just going to talk about how hateful they are, and talk about our side of like, we have a right to exist, but we're not going to actually address or delve into their arguments. And it's because our arguments make sense and they're not riddled with fallacies.
Because then they don't have to, they can argue with something completely different from what we said. I have a right to exist. Okay, find me someone who said you didn't.
Yeah, like, exactly.
Find that person, but that person doesn't exist. So they're arguing with a made up thing. I'm sure this is a specific logical fallacy.
I think it's a straw man. Yeah.
It does sound like a straw man to me. Yeah. And like that's what they are able to do when they silence that side of the debate, when they get those people banned from YouTube and Twitter, so you can't actually see what they said anymore. And I think that is genuine silencing, because you know, for example, Vanessa Boki, prominent GC YouTuber, she recently got banned from YouTube and Twitter after being banned from many other platforms, including Etsy, Redbubble, etc. in the past.
Yeah, and she got fired too, right?
Yes, she was also fired from her job at a pizza shop, like a pizza shop.
Jesus.
Anyways, and so I think she was genuinely silenced. Because she was speaking out. She was using her voice fearlessly. She honestly, I think she's actually like incredibly brave, like compared to me even. Like she just really will dive right in head first and give zero fucks. And she's still not being silent, because I can tell you, know, on Instagram, where she has not been banned yet, she's still going off, and she plans to continue on, you know, any other place where she does have a voice and where she's not being silenced. And so I think that we see this like interesting combination of actual genuine silencing, like there was a voice there and now it's been deleted.
Right, exactly. There's a blank space where her voice, where her channel was. It's really scary. And you know, then it's like they have this phrase, silence is violence. Okay, silence is violence. What the hell does that even mean? And you know, this is why I want to make my pronouns like the silent B in music, the rest note. So be on the lookout for that. That's going to be my pronouns. Respect them, or it's violence, literal. And Rob Hoogland, the dad in Canada, he was ordered by the judge not to use his daughter's name or the word daughter or the she, her pronouns. So they said that this was actually, it was something like family violence, like for him to quote unquote misgender her.
Like domestic violence?
Well, the phrase that's written here in this Russia Today article is family violence. And I think that is part of why he ended up in jail, because they characterized this gag order as like protecting the daughter from this form of violence.
I mean, I don't even know what to say to this. It's so dystopian that it feels like it can't be real. And yet we know it is. We know this is like a real person who is speaking out against this despite everything that has happened to him. And I don't know.
I mean, it doesn't feel like the modern Western world, does it? It feels like Soviet Russia, or it feels like some regime. It was
like Iran right now. Like, yes. Like, I mean, there are people who are speaking out. Okay, I think, for example, there's a woman, I don't know her name off the top of my head, but she has been speaking out against compulsory hijab in Iran, and she has since had to flee Iran. But her family, including her brother is currently in custody of the regime, arrested in Iran because of her speaking out. And yet she continues to speak. Her mother, too. Her mother has been, I don't know if she's currently under arrest, but her mother has been threatened by the government, and her whole family is essentially at risk because of this woman who's speaking out. And it's amazing to me. The bravery. I mean, if my family was being held captive by a violent dictatorial regime, I would probably be silent, honestly. Like, I can tell you, a lot of people say that I'm brave because I speak out on gender identity and stuff. I do not feel like I've ultimately, compared to what a lot of people in the world experience, have had much to lose. I think, for example, there's a woman in, I believe it's Afghanistan, but I'll double check and try to find the link and put it in the description. But she's running a radio station against extremist terrorists in Afghanistan, a feminist radio station speaking out against extremism. And they have bombed her radio station. They have done everything they can to try to silence her, and she won't be silenced. She continues to speak out. She continues refusing to be silent, and they have done everything they can to shut her down. And so I don't really see, what I do as brave that often, because I know that if I were in their situations, I actually probably would just be one of the silent ones. I would just be going along trying to save my own skin. And so then I think, well, that's what's going on in the world. And then in Canada, where they're defunding domestic violence shelters, they're called for gender identity reasons. Then they are calling a father referring to his own daughter by reality that he knows, that he helped create. They're calling that family violence.
Right.
It really seems like doublespeak, and it's so insidious that this is happening at the same time that they're defunding actual domestic violence shelters, and then they're rebranding misgendering as family violence. That is,
and not to mention that what he's not allowed to speak out against is physical, irreversible harm on his daughter's body.
Right.
So where is the real harm here? Where is the real child abuse? It's clearly from the experimental medicine. It's not from the dad trying to stand up for his child. By the way, I wonder if we could get in touch with that Afghan woman. That would be really interesting if we could somehow support her or talk to her or something. But
yeah, that would be crazy. I'm going to look it up and see if I can find this article I read about her. I think I found her. I think the woman who dares run a feminist radio station in Afghanistan.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
she asked the Afghan government for protection, but it became clear that none was forthcoming. So after a few days, she went back on air because we just couldn't give in to the threats.
I've heard people say, people that I've spoken to as well, and I've read, they just feel that they can't be silent. They feel compelled to speak. That's so interesting, because we're talking about how all these external forces compel you not to speak, but people then feel compelled by their conscience to speak. They feel like they have to. They don't feel like they have a choice. It's so interesting. And I think that's what Rob Hoogland feels. Like he doesn't want to go to jail, obviously, but I think he feels like he has to. He feels like he has to protect his daughter. We know parents sacrifice themselves for their children.
Yeah, I agree.
So in a weird way,
I'm distracted by this article.
Oh yeah, that's okay. In a weird way, I wonder if Rob would even say, well, I didn't have a choice because I had to speak to try to save my daughter.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like I am not someone who usually feels compelled to speak to the point where I'm not making a conscious decision anymore. I think that my partner, Alex, for example, actually is that kind of person. He literally cannot shut up even when it's no good for him. And sometimes I have to tell him like, hey, like you shouldn't say that, and I think that some people do have this drive to like honesty and openness, like no matter what, like it's just a personality trait.
Right.
And I think it's great in a lot of ways in terms of this being someone who you could trust, because like he couldn't lie to me if he wanted to.
That's
I love
hilarious.
it.
That's perfect. Right.
Yeah, but at the same time, am someone who will be strategically silent. I try not to lie, but I will be strategically silent when it is convenient for me to be, and when I don't have that like little voice in my head consciously saying you need to speak up about this. But a lot of times these days, I feel like the things that I do choose to speak up on are the things that are easy, convenient for me. I mean, for me these days, the hardest things to speak up on are actually things internal to feminism, because this is like my community now. And so anything that's like an internal debate within feminism are the things that I actually do censor myself quite a lot on, because I don't want to get swept up in that drama and have it derail me from my work. And so, yeah, I do think I silence myself a bit. And you could say, well, maybe I'm silenced by the, by the bullying tactics that happen even within our movement. But no, I think I'm pretty actively choosing to be silent on those issues, because I don't see that fight as being my fight that I'm choosing right now. It's a choose your battle sort of situation.
Yeah. And that makes me think of something that Brett Weinstein and Heather Haying were just talking about on their podcast, Dark Horse. And they were talking about that phrase, the hill you choose to die on. So they were saying like the reason that that's a phrase is because you can choose the hills that you don't want to die on. If you want to be able to live to fight another day, you choose, okay, this isn't the hill I'm going to die on because that's the hill I'm going to die on. So I don't want to die on this hill because I got to get over to that hill so I can go die for that cause. So I think that's interesting too.
And that's true. Like, we all choose our priorities. And if your priority is this gender debate right now, which for me, it sort of became my priority, not honestly because I wanted it to be, but because my priority, I guess, was actually my right to speak on something. And that I felt like I did not want to cave to that pressure. And I was, I'll die.
It was me too. It was like, okay, so this is something that I don't really care about. Like, I can see that these aren't women, but I don't really care. But then because this was something that I became aware that if I said it out loud, I would be vilified just to the nth degree, that's when I really had to be like, well, what's going on here? And like, actually, this is the truth and I have to say it.
Yeah. It's literally because of the silencing tactics that both of us spoke up. And I think that there's probably many others like that who, like, I was really involved in animal rights. I had other aspects of feminism that I care a little bit more about, honestly. Direct service work around male violence is something that I've never really been able to bring myself to do myself because of my own past trauma, but it's something I really care about supporting as much as I can through, kind of more of the behind the scenes work with some of these organizations. And yet I was dragged away from the stuff that I really was passionate about into this fight because I could not stand the idea that I was going to be silenced on this because it was so stupid that would be the case. And yes. And so then it became my fight. And so in that way, their silencing tactic has backfired, because if I was never fired for writing this Medium article, I would have never gotten the platform that I have today. I wrote 2 articles on Medium by the time that I was canceled and silenced, you could say, but I was not silenced because instead I was able to turn that, when I got fired, it allowed people to trust me enough as a like, oh, you're a real radical feminist, you're a real GC, you're not some rando, that then they all joined a website that I made. And then because all these people joined a website that I made, Spinster, then I could promote my material there. And so then I could like get attention to the work that I was doing. And like literally because they tried to silence me, I got a bigger platform than I would have ever had if I stayed being a software engineer at PromptWorks. Like I would have never been anybody to this movement if that had been the case.
And it's funny because I've said this before to you, like what we say isn't that brilliant or innovative. It's like stuff everybody knows that everybody's scared to say. And that's why there's this space for us to say it. But I also wanted to show you this short clip of someone who we wouldn't expect to be useful to us, but Jordan Peterson, because he had this pick your poison concept that I really liked. So I'm going to go to it. And
we're going to get trash for showing Jordan Peterson.
Okay, give me the trash, guys, because I'm the Jordan Peterson semi-fan.
That's the 18th century.
But see, I made this compilation that is just a private compilation, but I have Chomsky, I have all these free speech. Here we go.
Is the alternative to violence. And there's lots of people who like violence and who are waiting for the opportunity to use it. And I'm hoping that we can talk our way out of it.
Okay, sadly, that wasn't the pick your poison one. Maybe this is the pick your poison.
That was interesting, though.
It's good. Yeah.
Are you currently afraid for your job?
Not particularly. I mean, I decided when I started this, look, lots of times in your life, you're choosing between things to be afraid of. In fact, you're always doing that in life. And I've known for a long time that if I was going to pick what to be afraid of, I was going to be afraid of not speaking rather than speaking. So, and I think, people have commented and did today too on my bravery, and that isn't really how I see it. I see that I'm taking the path of least resistance, and that's how frightened I am of the alternative. What?
Yeah, I really like that quote.
Yeah. That's interesting. I do wonder, is it a personality type, or do certain experiences make you feel this way? Like, what makes it that someone is more afraid of the alternative of self-censoring than they are the alternative of the mob and the hate that you're going to get and the pushback? And I mean, he still has his job as far as I'm aware. So ultimately, I don't think he's had many actual material.
Oh, he got famous and rich. He got rich and famous, quite literally. In the same way that we have people interested in watching us, it made people more interested in him because of that.
Yeah, because people want to hear what they're thinking but afraid to say. It's like they want to hear someone else say it because it's validating when the whole world is telling you you're wrong and gaslighting you. It's crazy making, and then to hear someone actually speak the truth that to be true, I think it's it helps reaffirm I'm not crazy, I am sane, the rest of the world is insane, and thank you for saying that, because I think it just helps people remind themselves that they're not crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And I do really like his framing of pick your poison. I mean, regardless of the fact that it did make his career and his fortune, he still has to deal with a lot of shit. We have to deal with a lot of shit. I mean, we didn't make a fortune, and we lost our jobs, and we suffered these consequences. And it's funny because I know for me that I picked the right poison. I mean, I think it was the biggest blessing in the world that I was just and I don't even know if I can say that I picked that, because I didn't choose what happened to me. I really wanted that career. And, but I think what would have happened to me is that over time, I would have started to silence myself. I think that it would have been a really sad thing as I gradually would have began to realize that the publishing industry was so censorious. And I don't think it would have been long before I realized. I mean, I hadn't been in there for long, so that's why I didn't get it. And I was new on Twitter too, because if you're on Twitter and you're in the publishing world, you're going to be seeing that stuff. So that would have been so much more depressing for me if at my most vulnerable moment when I was being mobbed and attacked, if they hadn't done what they did, fire me, which precipitated everything. But, I think that if my boss had handled it differently and not fired me immediately, but let me talk to him about it and listen to me and said, okay, what can we do to move forward here? Maybe we need to do an apology or a statement, and what can we do to make you keep your job, and that would have been the worst thing that could have ever even just thinking about it makes my gut it's horrible, because that would have been the lowest thing for me to go into that, and that would have destroyed me. And I felt like I was being decimated through this, but then I came out so much stronger and happier and freer. And I can't even imagine how depressing it would be to be in a career, in a job, in a field where people absolutely hate to hear the stuff that I'm saying, to the point where, I mean, really, they feel hatred and they feel so much anger and they want to see you hurt for it. I mean, not physically hurt, but so in some cases, yeah.
Yeah, you know, that's really interesting. My friend Lauren Adams Wolf, she's been collecting on a Twitter thread a list of what she calls the hostage letters, apology letters that people write after they have been dragged or someone tried to cancel them for something that they said that was heterodox. And they write these apology letters that really do sound like that they've been taken hostage. And they're like, everything is fine. I am totally sorry. Like, please don't cancel me. Like, it really, it's quite scary because you can hear that they're really not themselves in that they're really just trying to appease an abuser is what it sounds like. And I think it's really sad to watch that happen. And I agree. Like, this for me was definitely the right poison too. And I did not get rich off of this. I lost a lot of money when you consider how, like, I was making a really, really good salary at my comfy job as a software engineer, had really good 401k and benefits and free lunch on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And like, that was they paid for your transport. Like, I got a SEPTA pass and everything. God, it was a comfy job. And I am not making a fourth of what I was making there now off of my various jobs that I have here now. And yet I am so much happier. I feel so much more free. I really feel like the people that I am around now are people who I actually enjoy being around and trust, and I'm not afraid of. Like, I'm not afraid of my friends anymore, which the fact that I ever was is really messed up in the first place. I mean, that really is an abusive dynamic. Like, if you're afraid of people in your life. And for me, it was not a matter of, it was scary. Like, I didn't want any of it to happen in the moment. Maybe part of me did. I was unhappy in that job, but I didn't want to lose all my friends. I didn't want to be kicked out of the other, like, women's organizations that I was volunteering for. You know, I didn't want to be banned from all of these different groups and not allowed to come to the next happy hour that my friends group organized. Like, in that group chat with my friends, they literally said, we don't feel safe with you coming to happy hour. Like, I didn't want any of that. But
because
now,
obviously you were going to bring your AK-47. Like, you're not safe. Clearly you're not safe.
Yeah.
God.
Although, honestly, I do feel like I was not safe at that happy hour, because like, these people are much, I have gone out in public in Philly and actually been physically assaulted, or like the person I was with was physically assaulted. And so, like, when did that ever happen to them for their beliefs? Like,
that happens to you by activists?
Yes, we were at a vegan pizza shop in Philly, and we were attacked by people who knew us from our animal rights days, knew that we were TERFs, and they came up with us and started trying to pick a fight in the pizza shop. We left. We were like, okay, we're just gonna leave, and they followed us out, stalked us down the street, yelling slurs at us, calling me, I don't even know what we're allowed to say on this channel, but the B word.
You can say anything because we're not monetized.
Yeah, that's true. Well, a slur for gay people that starts with an F. They're yelling that at me and Alex, and then a man came up and hit Alex on the back of the head.
Jesus,
as we were leaving.
Christ.
Yeah. So, who's really not safe to be around? Like, it's just, all that is not to say that I genuinely actually think I'm not safe in public most of the time. I'm just saying that I know that didn't happen to the people who say they felt unsafe.
Well, and what the hell? They're yelling faggot at people. It's like, who do they think they're defending? And bitch and who do they think they're defending?
Yeah. And it was also misogynist and homophobic, like the whole thing. And yet we were considered the ones who were hateful. And it was so, like, you totally just proved our whole point here, guys. And it was crazy. I think we talked about flat earthers on this show before, but these were actually the flat earthers.
These are the flat earthers?
Yeah, these were the flat earthers. Fun people.
Well,
they were not ever really, like, close friends, those people. They were, like, kind of tangential to the friends group, the ones who actually attacked us. But it was really scary. And we were actually there getting pizza. It was the first time that we felt safe enough to like leave our house after some of this stuff had happened. And one of our friends coaxed us out. He stayed friends with us through the process and was like a good friend through the process. And even though he didn't totally agree or get the debate, he just thought what was happening to us was wrong. And so he was there with us when all this happened. And so I guess I just want to say at the same time that there were all these people who were treating us like shit, there was also people like him who were standing by us, even though he didn't really fully get it, but he just could tell that it was wrong. So, you know, props to him who, and actually there were two people who were there with us that day, a man and a woman who both were friends to us through the process. So shout out to you guys if you happen to watch this.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's not about the damn issues. It's about bullying. It's about, are you part of the mob or do you actually stand outside of it? It's about, are you the Lord of the Flies or do you say no? I mean, it's really, it's not even about the issues anymore. But just to be clear, in case people don't know, that was like when you basically came out as gender critical, right?
Yeah.
So that was, the evil turf rhetoric.
Yeah.
It's about the mob. It's about, do you say yes to the mob or do you say no to the mob? And, you know, I hate to make this the Jordan Peterson episode, but he has another, good point that he makes, that he says, don't do anything that makes you weak. And that something you said made me think of that when you talked about like continuing in doing those apology letters and doing those things and bowing and scraping. And like when you're, or even like being fearful of your friends and having to be in that position of weakness, where once you decided to do the really scary thing and do what you knew would give those horrible consequences, like that, even though you were stepping off the ledge, you were doing something that made you much stronger, interestingly enough.
Yes.
So like, and same with me, if I had somehow been given the option to do the bow and scrape, like if I had taken it, I don't think I would have, I have no idea what would have happened. I can't speak to hypotheticals, but that I know that would have been the weakening path for sure.
Yeah, I think that's completely true. You know, we see, for example, these organizations that when they're mobbed, they cave by doing some sort of like half apology, half whatever. And you can tell they're on the back foot then, like then they're defensive.
Yeah.
You know, for example, right now there's all this drama going on with the Free Software Foundation and Richard Stallman. It's a really long story for people who aren't into tech. So I guess the point is they had a problematic, cancelable person on their board. They fired him from the board. A year later, they realized they made a mistake and brought him back. And so now people are calling for the whole board of the organization to resign instead of just that one person who they got canceled and then uncanceled.
Right. Like maybe if they had stood their ground initially, then they might be in a stronger position now.
Yeah, and they did. But you know what's crazy is I thought they had learned from this because they were bringing him back. And he said in his little video, you know, some of you may like this, some of you may not, but it is what it is. And I'm glad to be here and I don't plan to resign again. And then, so I thought, okay, this organization has learned you don't ever cave to the mob. It's like with a toddler, like if they're throwing a temper tantrum, do not give them the candy. They will only throw more temper tantrums. And yet I thought they had learned. The president of the board said that he would be resigning when they had a transition plan in place, blah, blah, blah. And so it's like, you are on the back foot again. You should have just fucking ignore them. Just ignore them. Don't listen to what they're saying and just keep doing what you're going to do and stay strong. But they've seen that you caved once before when you fired him in the first place. And now you're on the back foot again. They're literally only going to just keep pushing until they knock you all down like bowling pins.
Yeah. And it's funny because then the weaker you get, the more craven and cowardly you get. And we see this when people do something like they throw someone under the bus in order to save their own skin. And, you know, we've been seeing this lately online, and we might be covering this again soon in another video. But like, it makes me think of the end of 1984. The ultimate way that they had him, Winston, was to blame it on Julia, to say, do it to Julia, because he was faced with the ultimate torture that scared him more than anything else. And
okay, for those of us who haven't read that since high school.
Let me explain that. Okay. So Winston fell in love with Julia, and you're not allowed to fall in love in this world, this dystopian totalitarian world. So they secretly became lovers, but the state knew, Big Brother knew, and got them and arrested them and tortured them. And they were trying to be dissidents. So, so the torture was stuff like, how many fingers am I holding up? 4, slap. How many fingers am I holding up? 5, slap. No, it's 4 when I say it's 4, and it's 5 when I say it's 5. Okay, it's like reprogramming. And then the ultimate torture was to have, I mean, the ultimate torture is like what you're most afraid of is what they give to you. But what the goal for them with that ultimate torture was to have you tell them to do it to your lover. So when Winston cried out in the torture chamber, do it to Julia, do it to Julia, that's when they knew he was broken. Wow. And he never came back from that. So he was broken. So, I mean, you know, that's like the thing. If you let yourself get weaker and weaker by continuously choosing the path of less resistance because, you know, you want to go to that happy hour again, you don't want conflict, or you don't want whatever conflict is going to happen in the moment, you want to avoid it. So you stay quiet. That makes you weaker. And then ultimately, you are so weak that you would be in this position where you would start throwing people under the bus.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking.
Saddest book. I mean, saddest fucking book.
Yeah, God, I think in high school I was a real slacker. I think I probably read the Cliff Notes just to pass the exam.
I was a real nerd, so I was like,
that now.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah. You should read it.
I mean, I was reading the books I wanted to read in high school, which is not what was assigned. So I mean, I think it's a really interesting question of when should you strategically be silent and when should you speak up? And I don't know if there's a clear answer to that, but I think that like this evaluation is something we're kind of constantly doing, just even in our day-to-day. Like if you have a little disagreement with your partner, like not to, you know, name anything specifically off the top of my head, but, you know, your partner loaded the dishwasher in a way that is absolutely insane and probably the sign of a psychopath. Like, do you speak up on this, or is it worth the trouble? Is that the hill you want to die on in this relationship? But then we do the same thing in real life all the time. Is this thing the thing that I'm going to risk everything for, or I want to live to fight another day so I can go make my stand on a different hill?
Yeah, and sometimes you do want peace rather than victory, right? So that's fine and good in some cases. But I think it also comes down to that pick your poison thing. Like, would you rather, because if you pick your peace, then that means you've chosen to accept that he loads the dishwasher like a psycho because you picked that poison rather than like starting a whole big fight about it. But in other cases, we've seen that what feels scarier at first can sometimes be the far less lethal poison in the long run.
Yeah, and sometimes just going ahead bottoms up this poison of not allowing yourself to be silenced, to not be silent when you do actually have a genuine choice, when the risk is worth it to you, can long-term put you in a better position because you're not always the weak one, the one who is caving, the one who's always on the back foot and always in the defensive mode. Suddenly you're actually the one with a little bit of control back again when other people aren't controlling your life and your speech and your every thought.
Exactly. Like the don't do things that make you weak totally works in reverse. When you do the little things that make you strong, you do build yourself up and you feel braver and more courageous, and you have better self-esteem, self-regard. So you're more likely to take the leap. Whereas if you do the things that make you weak, you have lower self-regard. You're like, oh, I'm such a loser. True. And then you're less likely to be able to do it next time.
Yeah. This actually reminds me of a topic we thought about talking about today and decided not to, which is shame. And I think that there's actually a real tie-in here with that. I think when we do something that makes us weak, when we allow ourselves to be put on the defensive, or when we cave, when we, you know, sell off that little part of our soul, our little bit of right to our speech to appease whatever, I think probably a lot of times we feel shame about that. We actually feel bad. Like there's a part of our consciousness that's like, I feel ashamed that I let that happen to me. And then because this shame builds up, it can actually lead to some more toxic behavior. Like it can lead to then maybe, you know, we've talked a little bit, and I think we're going to have an upcoming episode on throwing people under the bus. Maybe because you feel ashamed that you have given this little bit of caving and that you have made yourself weak. And so because of that, you like lash out and take it out on someone else. Like, well, I made myself weak. Like you should make yourself weak too. Right. So I could feel less bad about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, shame is also used through silence, like something we didn't talk about, but in terms of silence today is shunning, like social shaming by directing silence at you. So silence is this powerful tool that we've seen that can be used either in many ways. Someday I'd also like us to maybe do a video on self-deluding, like where you, because we've done preference falsification, but I was thinking that there's something even deeper where you're like actually deluding yourself about what you think. You're not just falsifying what you say. And I wonder if that is part of the shame spiral that you just mentioned. So you buy into something a little bit, or you don't stick up for someone, or you go along with the mob, and then the person being targeted is saying something really quite reasonable, like men can't be women. And so then in order to justify that you've done it, and to the little bit of shame that you have for maybe going after them or whatever it was, or maybe if it was your friend and like they got kicked out of the friend group or something, maybe in order to justify that shame, you actually start to create that self-delusion there where you start believing the emperor is wearing beautiful clothes.
I think that is so true. In my own life, like what you said about you allowed your friend to get kicked out of the group, I have totally seen that. There are people who, in various different friends group that I was in, who mostly agreed with me. They were essentially gender critical, if not full radical feminist, or like as strong about it as I, or they basically were like, yeah, I don't really believe that, but let's be nice, like whatever. And basically they agreed with me, and they would say so in private. And then when push came to shove and the group turned on me, they turned on me too. And what I have seen is each of those people who did not stick up for me in the moment, if they went along with the mob, they have since doubled down. And I can think of two people who are very different in many ways, but like this holds very true for them specifically from two different friends groups this happened to, who now are very outspoken about gender identity ideology and very trans women are blah, 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 all of this stuff that they did not believe before and weren't even saying before because like they had no reason to, but now and I can't prove, I don't know what's in their hearts and minds. I can't prove that it's delusion versus virtue signaling to try to save themselves when they know that they secretly have these heterodox thoughts too. But based on their behavior towards me, I genuinely believe that their belief actually did change to align with what was a safer belief for them. And I do think that they deluded themselves.
And that's the do it to Julia thing, because in order for Winston to justify...
Sorry, Alex is making funny faces at me.
Alex, stop. This is serious. I think that that's also the do it to Julia thing, because when Winston, basically the idea behind that is he's going to do something that is going to instill self-hatred because he just betrayed his love. And they knew that it would kill his love for her. That was what it did, definitively. But they also knew, I think, that it would then make him forever need to justify it by believing what the party said, by believing that they were right, Big Brother was right, and he was wrong, and he had been wrong in his transgressions. So I wonder if that's kind of the same thing.
And I think on a societal level, that's kind of happening. We're at the point where we're allowing gender nonconforming, gay, lesbian children to be sterilized, to be medically experimented on, to be mutilated. And as a society, we all kind of have to now be like, yeah, we believe this. We really believe this. We totally believe this. Because if we don't, what does that mean?
Exactly. And
it's
I think
really scary.
It's really scary. I think that especially pertains to parents too. You know, like Rob Hoogland was talking about, he did an interview with Aaron Brewer on YouTube, and he was talking about his ex-wife and how she was going along with the affirming and the transition. And, you know, they talked about that it's like, once you go along with it, you can't let any doubts start to come in, because then you have to realize what you've done to the unthinkable, really, I think.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And I think that just, again, shows that you cannot give that inch.
Yeah.
And it's not just because then they'll take a mile. It's because then you have to go the mile to justify the inch that you've already done. And it's almost like the IKEA effect, but of ideologies of like,
what is
do you know the IKEA
No.
effect? Okay. So it's this idea that like, if you put so much time and energy and frustration into building something, into creating something, you develop this attachment to it as if it is like yours in a way that's really unique and special, but like it's literally just IKEA furniture, but it was so frustrating. But now you fucking love that couch. I'm never getting rid of that couch. You have no idea what I did to make that couch. Like I lost sleep over building that couch. And so there's this idea that if you just are forced to put time, energy, frustration, blood, sweat, and tears into making something happen, that then you become really attached to it. And some have even theorized that maybe that's part of why people love their IKEA furniture so much. It's not because it's good quality, beautiful design, Swedish furniture, but because we have all frustrated and or struggled so much with the frustration of trying to build it.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, if you had to do something really hard, like throw a friend under a bus, like silence yourself, like sit back quietly while you watched a friend get burned at the stake, that's actually really emotionally hard. And so then maybe you become more attached to this ideology because it was so hard, you better fucking love it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's really similar to the sunk cost fallacy, where, you know, okay, I've put all this in. And I mean, I was faced with this. I have one example in my life when I was halfway through college and I was going deeply into debt. And I was just starting to realize that this was a scam. And when I say that, it's like, is it a scam? Well, I don't know if it's really a scam for real, a literal scam, but there's something very scammy about it. I did drop out, luckily, because I got good advice, which was, if you're digging yourself into a hole, stop digging. So that's what I did. And I dropped out. And then now I only have half the debt that I would have had. But I think that does psychologically play a big role here. And it's like, I've put my kid on cross-sex hormones. She's grown a beard. Her voice has dropped. Those things aren't going to change back ever, probably. And now I can't go back. So I have to commit even more. I have to double down. I have to tell myself this was good and right. I can't even look into that part of my brain that might question that, let alone, you know, try to desist or change.
Yeah. Because if you admit that what you did was not right, then you're faced with the reality that you just allowed this and participated in this happening to your own child. And that is devastating. No parent. I mean, I genuinely believe that most parents in this debate, no matter what side they're on, they probably do actually want what's best for their child. I think it's pretty rare that parents actively do things that they know is not what's right for the child. But I think obviously people are misguided in what is actually best for the child.
Absolutely.
So it's really sad, but you know, our own biases get in the way of us actually course correcting. And so we end up doing more harm and doubling down on that harm. And then convincing other people to do harm because I can't be the only one doing this, or else then I might think there's something wrong with it.
Exactly.
And it's a real shame, and it's a totally natural bias that we all have. And you know, there are many things that I'm sure I have that about. But here we are.
So one more Jordan Peterson.
You have a problem.
The thing with Jordan Peterson is like, they've done to him what they've done to us. Because they don't agree with him, they've made him out to be this hateful Nazi. He's not. I read his whole book, his first book, and listened to a lot of his lectures online. I don't think he's a misogynist. I do disagree with a lot of the stuff he says. But he's not this hateful person at all. It's a smear campaign. And I think he has some good stuff when it comes to the psychology. That's where I like him. I'm not sure about him politically.
Well, that's what he actually is. He's actually like a psychologist.
Exactly. So. And so the fact that he's looked at for all his political opinions is like, no, let's leave that. Let's just keep him where he knows that there's psychology. But he has this other point.
I think people have to stay in their lanes, because if they do, I'm not sure what my lane would be at this point. My degree is also in psychology, but I don't have like a higher ed degree in it.
But I mean, like, in terms of holding him to this standard, like, I don't look to him for politics stuff, but I enjoy to look to him for psychology stuff sometimes. But he has this other great point that it's like about fighting the dragon. Like, don't let the dragon grow. Defeat it when it's a baby dragon. Don't ignore it and act like it's not a problem. I know it's so sad. Like,
it's really sad.
I know, but he did explain it well. It was like, maybe you don't have to kill it, but like you have to.
Oh my god, this reminds me of this movie that like I literally think like I feel like I'm gonna cry every time I even think of it. If you want to be devastated, it's called Sintel.
But
don't kill it. How about Jordan Peterson? Like
he's a dragon phobe.
You're saying yes, dragon phobic.
Yeah. Anyway, it's this concept of address the problem right away. Because if you're scared to address it, so you choose silence over confrontation, you will only see the problem grow, and then you will have to deal with a full-grown dragon, and you will have to deal with something much bigger. Yeah. So you know what, guys? The moral of the story is don't speak up when you see something wrong. Go along with the mob. Throw your friends under the bus. Do things that make you weak, and do it to Julia. That's the moral.
And those are our 5 stances.
Yeah.
And you can take that to the
Yeah.
And you know, if you're someone who feels like you have a strong reason to stay silent or to speak up, I'm really curious to hear what reasons people use to justify one way or the other. And when you choose to make a strategic decision, what are the factors that go into that? Do you feel like you have a choice? Is choice a social construct? What do you think? Feel free to drop it in the comments, or you can send us a message. We're on Twitter at Plebity and at 4WPub. You can also email us at submit@identitycrisis.xyz. We would love to hear your thoughts. You can send us questions, topics you want us to talk about, or sometimes people just send us like their day-to-day troubles and rants, and we're interested to hear that too.
And don't forget to check out MK's column on 4W, corresponding column. I always enjoy reading them quite a bit. I feel like you take what we talked about and then somehow you synthesize it and come out with this like digestible point. It's pretty amazing. I don't know how you do that. But
thanks. So because I talked out all the kinks with you on the video, and so then I actually have a solid thesis by the time I sit down to write the column.
That totally makes sense. So yeah, make sure to check that out and check back in here on our channel next Monday for our next episode.